Hi, I'm Eric Whedon, a seasoned go-to-market software executive, team builder, and a catalyst for revenue growth. My journey is fueled by a profound passion for ushering in a new era of dental healthcare through cutting-edge AI technology.
Hi, I'm Liz Strickwerda. Since 2008, I've been immersed in the world of dental marketing and business technology. At TrueLark, I focus on explaining how generative AI can help multi-practice dental organizations scale while redefining the patient experience. Together, we welcome you to Navigating DSO Innovation, where we have unfiltered conversations with dental leaders and discuss how they are using tech to win in this booming market. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Navigating DSO Innovation. In this episode, we're delving in to the latest in cybersecurity, tailored specifically for the dental and healthcare industries. We're honored to host Gary Salman, CEO and co-founder of BlackTalon Security. With decades of experience in software development and IT, Gary is a pioneer in cloud-based healthcare systems. He's not only a sought-after speaker and writer on cybersecurity threats, but he's also trained tens of thousands of practices across the U.S. on maintaining best practices in cybersecurity. Gary has been featured in major national publications, and his expertise extends beyond cybersecurity, with over 20 years of experience as an instructor at West Point and involvement in law enforcement. As a member of InfraGard, Gary collaborates with the FBI to share crucial information and intelligence. BlackTalon Security, under Gary's leadership, has successfully assisted with some of the largest ransomware attacks in U.S. history, recovering all data and preventing millions of dollars in damages. Thanks for being with us, Gary. That's an impressive bio.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here with you guys.
Great. So to start off, how has the cyber threat landscape evolved over the past year? And specifically, how has the healthcare sector been affected?
Yeah, so I think the data kind of points at one really, specific thing. So if you look at the Internet Crime Report that the FBI just released related to cyber attacks against critical infrastructure in 2023, the number one attacked industry was healthcare in 2023, right? We would expect that to be government sector, financial institutions like banks, investment companies, et cetera. No, but the number one on the list was actually healthcare. And I believe what's happening in the cyber world, specific to threat actors, which is kind of the fancy word for hackers, the threat actors now realize that the pot of gold is in the healthcare space because of the wealth of information that's stored on these networks. So if you think about what businesses or healthcare entities store on their servers related to patient data, they have the name, address, social, date of birth, patient data, insurance cards, driver's licenses, like just literally a treasure trove of information. And they also understand our laws related to privacy. So when a hacker gets into a healthcare system and they see the data that they have access to, they instantly realize, I got them, right? This group is going to have to pay the ransom, because if they don't, what the hackers will do is they will not only steal the data, but they will publish the data. And that will put the healthcare entity in an even worse situation from a legal and compliance perspective when this patient data is scattered all over the dark web for sale. So I think that's the biggest issue that we're seeing, versus other types of businesses where they're like, well, if they want a list of our clients, who cares, right? There's nothing I really have to worry about from a legal or compliance perspective. And the hacking community knows that almost every doctor, dental group, medical group, they pay the ransom, unfortunately, because they can't have the data published. So that's one of the big reasons why we're seeing such a tremendous uptick. And what the hackers communicate, they talk about, they're like, hey, stop wasting your time going after these types of businesses. Here's the pot of gold, dental practices and medical groups. And we're actually seeing them targeted now. We're seeing executive teams at DSOs being targeted frequently. So yeah, it's no joke what's going on right now. And the hackers are leveraging artificial intelligence, to generate phishing and spear phishing emails. So they don't need to have a good working knowledge of our language. They can just go into a language model engine like ChatGPT and say, hey, write me a letter, and here are all the parameters for it. And guess what? It generates a better letter than most people can write themselves. So kind of like the days of broken English and improper use of our language, that's all long gone. So, as much as I love AI, I'm a firm believer of it for many things. It can also be turned against us. So.
Absolutely. So what are the odds of a healthcare entity, let's say a dental practice? What would be the odds that they would experience a cyber attack?
So if you look at some of the articles that are out there right now, and a lot of government agencies are saying, it's going to be over the next couple of years close to 100%. That's the unfortunate reality of it, and that probably transcends almost all businesses. It's not just healthcare, but because of the points that I just brought up with healthcare being a huge target, my belief is at some point a majority of healthcare entities will be targeted, and a subset of those will be hit, unfortunately. It's not always a ransomware attack. It could be an intrusion into an email system. It could be wire fraud, practices and DSOs paying invoices with incorrect wiring information. Payroll fraud is a big problem right now, all implemented through somewhat unsophisticated means, I'll say, through emails going to HR folks or accounts payable, accounts receivable, an email that looks like it's coming from the CEO to the CFO to someone that wires money out. Like all these things, they're not super sophisticated, but they do a tremendous amount of damage. And then obviously you have the sophisticated hacks where, the hackers are in fact hacking into these networks, hacking past the firewall, hacking through devices and computers and servers and getting into the environment. So we do absolutely see a ton of that. And obviously that's something that I see most dental offices and DSOs, they don't have the solutions in place to protect themselves against that.
Yeah, every time I talk to an expert like yourself, my anxiety level goes up a little bit, Gary, as it probably should, right? A couple of things that you commented on. One, just kind of the low hanging fruit, I think, for hackers out there, just the social engineering. I was hearing and seeing a lot of people that were targeted that were brand new employees of an organization, and the hackers essentially were getting this information on LinkedIn, like, hey, look, I got a new job. And then they were getting a text from the CEO of like, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. Go get gift cards or whatever, give me some information, something of that nature. I'm new. Oh my goodness, the CEO is reaching out to me. I better respond instantly and do this thing. And I've heard crazy stories about, people actually doing the thing that they're being asked to do. So I imagine a lot of that is happening. And then on the thing that kind of was in my head was Delta Dental got a breach last year, I think around 7 million records, if I recall. I can imagine that the attackers out there are kind of looking for those juicy targets. Is it the juicy targets that are most vulnerable, or when you're talking earlier, is it everybody? Is it, the individual practice all the way up to, you name the top 5 DSOs in America?
It's everyone. And look, some practices get hit by accident. I'll use the word accident in air quotes, right? Hackers will scan their devices. Hackers will scan their firewalls. There's misconfigurations. There's vulnerabilities on those devices. The hackers actually don't know what type of business they are. They, breach those vulnerabilities, get onto the network, and they're like, whoa, pot of gold. This is a dental practice, and they have 10,000 records, 50,000, whatever it might be, or DSO with potentially millions. And then there's the absolute targeted attacks, right? Where they do in fact use platforms like LinkedIn and other search engines to find these targets of opportunity. They'll buy database lists of these folks. They'll try and get IP addresses. They'll buy credentials like usernames and passwords to VPNs. They'll buy them through the dark web to specifically target these organizations. So I think you brought up a really great question. And my belief is that more and more of these orgs are being targeted specifically. And then there's ones that just get hit by accident, like a little mom and pop practice sitting out in Idaho, right? Becomes a victim. And they're like, how did they even find me, right? Why would they have targeted my GP practice? That's just how the hacking community is working. And the hackers also know the bigger targets are a lot harder. So if they can go after a couple smaller targets that don't have the same defensive technologies as the bigger groups, they may actually make more money, because they're easier to break into. They can execute their attack quicker. They're probably going to get paid much more rapidly. And you do a couple small ones, and it could equal the same dollars as a medium-sized group.
Yeah, kind of a follow-on question that with the smaller guys, is the ability for them to protect themselves a lack of budget? Is it a lack of awareness? Is it a lack of prioritization? Where do you see kind of the industry sitting in is dental behind the curve, or are they where everybody else is at?
So I think it's some of all of those. I would say usually budget's not as much of an issue as you would think, because sound cybersecurity solutions actually isn't that expensive. I think there's a tremendous amount of misinformation out there about cyber. I always say that every ransomware case we've handled, and we've done hundreds of ransomware and other intrusions in the dental space, everyone's had an IT company, everyone's had a firewall, everyone's had antivirus, and the hackers defeated all of that. And I think what happens is there's two types of methodologies for protecting networks. There's defense and there's offense. And I would argue a lot of practices have junior varsity defense, right? If we're going to do a sports analogy here, they have their firewall, they have their antivirus, right? What happens is the IT vendor's like, oh, doctor, listen, I just bought you a new firewall. It's state of the art. And, you're running good antivirus software. You have nothing to worry about. And the doctor's like, okay, that's great. Let me go back to treating my patients, right? They don't know what questions to ask. And then 2 weeks later, they turn around and the IT vendor's like, I don't know how to tell you this, doctor, but your entire network is encrypted with ransomware, right? You're going to be completely down. So I think looking at cyber from defense and offense is very, very important. So I classify defensive capabilities as firewalls and antivirus software and maybe backups. But take a look at antivirus software. When is antivirus software triggering? Well, when something's already made it past your firewall and is on your network. And the antivirus software is either going to stop it or it's not. It's that simple. And unfortunately, what I see a lot of times is when the hackers get on these networks, because I see this because we do forensics investigations. So we actually get into kind of the bits and bytes of the machine, and we can recreate the crime scene on these computers. And one of the very first things the hackers do when they land on a computer in the network, they shut off the antivirus, right? They snip the wires on the alarm system, right? Just like a criminal would do if they're breaking into a building or your house. They're going to try and cut the connection to the police. So they get onto these computers, and a lot of these dental practices have antiquated antivirus software. You know what the hacker does? They go to the little system tray, in the bottom right-hand corner where you have the date and time. They right-click on the antivirus software and say uninstall. I mean, people look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, go back to your office and try it if you don't believe me. And I get calls all the time like, yeah, you were right. I was able to uninstall it myself. And these are just little things that folks just don't think about. And when you disable antivirus, the hackers have full reign on your machines. And antivirus also doesn't stop the theft of patient data. Even the most advanced antivirus software will let a threat actor get onto a computer, link into the server potentially, and then download the entire patient database, all your x-rays, attachments, and none of that technology is going to send out a single alert to anyone, right? And they could sit there for weeks and do that. And now with the advent of high-speed internet, right, fiber connections, high-speed, 5G, ultra-wide, you can pull an entire practice's database off their network in a few minutes, and go on. And even if the software was able to detect that, it probably wouldn't even trigger in time. So I think those defensive mechanisms are really important, but practices are running really old antivirus software that allows it to be uninstalled. It's dictionary based, which means it has a dictionary of known threats. And if the hacker deploys a piece of malware that's in the dictionary, it typically will stop it. But you know what? Hackers go and buy all the antivirus software that's out there. They engineer their code so the antivirus software doesn't pick it up, and they evade detection. Like we're up against very, very sophisticated entities. A lot of these hacking groups that are hitting dental groups, dental practices, DSOs, they're generating $250 million a year in ransomware attacks. So if you don't believe right? That these groups aren't going after the most talented hackers in the world to write this code, you're very mistaken. You know, everyone is up against an extremely formidable adversary, almost like a superpower, right? You wouldn't, as an individual, go up against the United States or the UK or whatever, right? With you know,
I would not go one-on-one with LeBron James to use your basketball analogy, right?
You go into the ring, right? Yeah, or onto the basketball floor. So I think that's an issue. Yeah. The piece that, to answer your question, the piece that almost, I'll say 99% of dental practices and DSOs are missing is an offensive capability, right? These are technologies that are designed to find all of the holes and all of the defects and vulnerabilities in the environment, so the hackers don't even have the opportunity to get into your environment. It's very much like you heard my bio. I have 20 years law enforcement experience. So Kevin, you come to me and you're like, hey, listen, I know you do like the law enforcement thing. Can you come by my house and see like where my house is going to get broken into? I can say, hey, listen, those locks on your doors are $10 Home Depot locks. I can just take my foot and kick your door in, cut the bushes, put an alarm system in, put cameras in, put a dog bowl outside, you know, whatever it is. Let's harden your defenses and let's put a $300 Medico lock on your front door. A criminal may come up to your house and be like, I don't want to mess with the dog. I see the cameras, that lock, that's going to take me 15 minutes to get through. I'm just going to go to the neighbor's house and hit them. So in concept, offensive technologies identify all these vulnerabilities, all of this risk on the computer servers, laptops, firewalls, proactively alert on them, meaning it notifies us, it notifies the client, hey, you have a vulnerability on your firewall. If you don't fix it, this is what could happen to you. You have servers that are out of date, that aren't patched. All the things that hackers exploit, believe it or not, there's technology that can detect all that, but practices aren't running it, right? They're relying on some type of an alarm system to go off in the event that a criminal gets into the network. And my experience has been a majority of the time, it's too late. The event's over by the time those things are triggering. So technologies like real-time vulnerability scanning that look for these vulnerabilities, these holes, these weaknesses is an extremely powerful technology that is now cost-effective for dental groups. Previously, like 3 or 4 years ago, you're talking Fortune 500 type technology, but it's come down in price dramatically. Cyber companies deploy it. Penetration testing. This is a really interesting concept. This is where ethical hackers that work for cyber companies assume the role of a cyber criminal, actually try and break into their clients' networks, with approval. That can help the client really understand where they have risk so they can address risk. Because in the end, the business that I'm actually in is cyber risk, right?
Absolutely.
Let's identify. What's that?
I was just going to say, so what would a typical cyber, event, a data breach event, how does that work? Walk us through, a typical attack.
So most ransomware attacks, regardless of the size, whether the dental group has 10 computers or 10,000, right? The event is going to be a minimum of a 2-week event, right? And a lot of IT vendors will be like, doctor, that's just not possible. We'll press this magic button on the backup and everything's just going to come back up. I have never seen that happen in my career, right? All the promises that have been made with backups and cloud technology and all this other stuff, unfortunately, the hackers are really smart and they understand that technology and they will probably disable it or damage it. So typically the event goes something like this. We call it, ground zero. So kind of like day one. So day one, you walk into the practice and typically there's some significant indication that you've been hit. Your practice management software doesn't work, your imaging stops working, but more likely there's going to be something on the screen telling you that you've been hacked. Right. Typically, we see a ransom note saying you've been hacked by, XYZ hacking group. They'll put skull and crossbones, like an image on the screen. And when you see that, most of the time they're done. Right. They pulled the pin on the grenade. They threw it into the computer network and they just sit back and wait to collect their money. So that's the initial indicator that you've been hit. You'll also often see encrypted files on the network. So it might say Smith, John Panarex. But instead of saying .jpg for a JPEG, it'll say, .127896. And that's just the encryption on the file. And you can't open the file. The hackers have put a lock on it. Next thing is you're typically the DSO or the dental group is going to call their IT vendor. The IT vendor is going to try and remote in or show up on site. They're like, oh, yep, you've been hit with ransomware. And then the next step is hopefully you have cyber insurance. And then you open a claim with your insurance carrier. They will hire a law firm that specializes in breaches, specifically for healthcare, to deal with obviously HIPAA obligations. That law firm will hire a company like ours, a incident response company. They're known as Digital Forensics and Incident Response. We would come in and basically quarterback the whole thing, right? We would then, from day 2 to day 4 to 5, we start gathering all the forensics information because basically a crime's been committed. And then what we're trying to do is figure out, did the hackers access patient data? Did they steal patient data? How many computers on the network are impacted? We're looking for backdoors that the hackers have deployed to try and make sure that they can always get back into the network. And often what we see is the IT companies come in and they, think they've cleaned it up. And then 2 weeks later, the practice gets hit a second time or a third time because the hackers have created these backdoors. So we'll come in and use highly sophisticated software designed for forensics investigations, deployed across the network, gather all this data. And during this period of time, we're also trying to figure out what data was on the network, what data was in the cloud, who has access to it, are backups viable, right? We're doing a whole bunch of things in parallel, trying to figure out what's going on. And then probably around day 4 or 5, we will reach out to the hackers and say, hey, here we are, right? We'll pretend to be someone else. We're not going to say we're a cyber company. We'll play the position of a doctor or someone in the practice and say, hey, you hit my practice, and what do you guys want, right? And then negotiations start. I will tell you, for most small practices, the dollar value is huge. It will typically be over 6 figures for ransom demand. We've seen small DSO groups with a dozen locations. Ransom demand is $2 to $3 million. So the hackers know what they have when they hit these healthcare entities. Negotiation will go back and forth, usually for a couple of days, trying to get the price down. Some hacking groups will negotiate. Others will say, you have 24 hours, we don't negotiate, pay it, or we'll publish your data. It's not a great situation when you come across those guys. But many will try and negotiate. Once the negotiation terms are agreed upon, then the practice or the insurance carrier has to wire us the money. So if the ransom demand is $250,000, they literally take $250,000 and wire it from bank to their bank to our bank. We have to then get the Bitcoin wallet from the hackers. We do a background check with the government to make sure we're not about to send money to a terrorist organization or a nation state. It's a whole other disaster, right? And then we'll make the payment, and then the hackers will turn over, usually within a few minutes to a few days, a tool called a decryptor. The decryptor is the tool that we put on all of the computers, and basically it unlocks the encryption on all the machines so we can recover all of the data that's been encrypted by the hackers. And then after that, it's kind of just a nightmare, right? All the computers typically have to have the hard drives ripped out or hard drives formatted, and all the software has to be reinstalled from scratch. That is now the standard operating procedure, because even with some of the most sophisticated forensics tools, the hackers can kind of create these backdoors that are undetectable, and you never want to be in a situation where you get hit a second or a third time. So unless there's a really good business justification, they're going to start from scratch. So I mean, you guys are in this space, you know what that's like, reinstalling practice management software, imaging, text messaging, payroll, HR, phone systems. So that's why I'd say most practices will literally have their doors shut for 2 to 6 weeks. We've had DSO shut down for 8 weeks because the hundreds of thousands of computers impacted. So, and then the end of it is huge.
Walk away.
It's insane, right? The dollars that go out the door is unimaginable, right? So what I tell everyone is take your daily production, multiply it by 10 to 15 business days. That money's gone. Right. And you may not get it back. I get it. Some patients will reschedule. Other patients who have emergencies will seek care elsewhere. That money's gone. And unfortunately, now what we're seeing for a lot of the small to medium sized groups is they burn through their cyber policy in a couple of days. And these events are taking 8 weeks. And it is literally like they'll take $250,000 a day and burn through it. And after 3 weeks, they have no cash left. We've dealt with groups where they couldn't make payroll. They couldn't do bonuses at the end of the year. They weren't getting any cash flow in from processing claims because their system was down. And I hate to be Debbie Downer here, but this is what a lot of organizations aren't thinking about. They're just like, oh, we have a backup and we'll be fine. And a majority of the time, I hate to say it, the hackers get the backups too. So there's a lot more. And then we deal with all the legal and compliance issues, right? Class action lawsuits are a real thing. You guys you follow this, the industry here, the DSOs are all getting hit with class actions. I won't say all, many of them are. And now I'm willing to bet over the next few months, we're going to start seeing the individual practices hit with class actions. First, it was like, first the judges were like, no, we're not allowing class actions against victims of a crime. And then some attorneys figured out how to get the class actions through. And then the judges or juries were ruling in favor of the plaintiffs, meaning the patients. And now it's common now when the second an organization either puts out notice that they've been hit by a cyber event or they file with Office for Civil Rights, it's public information. Within days, all the law firms are nailing those groups with class actions. And I would be willing to bet the next iteration is the individual provider, right? The small practice is getting hit with a class action, right? So what happens with the policy is once they're maxed out, that lawsuit's going to be on the doctor to pay out of his or her pocket. So I think people really need to up the game here.
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. I remember seeing an incident where there was a data breach and it was a public company. And so they had all the class action lawsuits, but they had these shareholders suing the company because of the share price going down because of the breach, right? Gary, let me ask you this. You talk a lot about these entities that are operating out of, let's say China or Russia, well-funded, well-organized, that are hiring the best of the best out there. And it sounds to me like we're kind of outgunned, right? It's like the JV basketball team playing, the LA Lakers or, pick your favorite NBA team out there. Are we just not keeping up? Like, and you talk about the IT vendors that are working with the practices, the DSOs, or maybe it's an internal team saying, hey, we configured a new firewall. You're set. We got the backups. We're doing all these defensive measures. Are we keeping up with the talent in our ecosystem of IT vendors? Do we have enough CISP certified people out there? I mean, are we just, is it just we're fighting Goliath and we need more guys like you?
Right. So fascinating question. I'll say that of all the investigations we've done, the digital forensics investigations, there were only a couple where we said, I'm not sure any tool would have stopped this or anything would have stopped that. The reality is almost everyone, I'll call it 99%, was preventable. And it goes back to, I think, I hate to say it, but it's just the way it is. I feel like a lot of the IT companies don't actually understand the threats. And I was on and I think this is going to answer your question. I was on a really interesting discussion. I was sitting on a panel with a very large law enforcement agency out of LA and all of the largest hospital systems in the country, right? We're on this panel. And one of the agents said, one of the biggest problems we see now is the issue related to tools and vendors, right? So I'm working for a company that provides antivirus, right? Or a backup solution. And then I'll make a statement and be like, oh, this tool will prevent ransomware and, you can't be a victim, right? Or this backup is ransomware proof. Okay. Then the hackers get in, they find the backup system and they couldn't deploy ransomware, but what did they do? They just deleted the backup. So I think a lot of times we're relying on people telling us that you'll be fine and the tools designed to stop this type of thing. The hackers are really smart and they often get around tools. I think practices and DSOs need to start thinking very differently. At the DSO level, this starts with the executive team, right? Whether it's the C-suite or even above them, the board. At individual practices, this is the doctor or doctors. And the biggest mistake that I see is the lack of trust but verify. Okay, so let's take the role of, Dr. Mary Stein, DDS, right? Maybe she's like, I read this article from the ADA. I'm worried about cyber. She goes back to her IT company and they're like, hey, Dr. Stein, don't worry about this. You're fine. You've never had an issue before. And this is what I hear all the time. None of her customers have ever had an issue, right? I hear it all the time. And she's like, okay, that's good. I don't have anything to worry about. But what are they doing, right? What are they doing? They're putting antivirus software in. So I think the flip side is you do need these offensive capabilities that we talked about, like the penetration testing, the vulnerability scanning, all of these things. But most importantly, it needs to be done by a third party. And the question that I ask all the time when I lecture live, I ask for a show of hands in the audience. I said, I'll say, doctors, how many of you have sat down with your IT vendor and they've pushed a piece of paper in front of you and said, doctor, this is every single place we're vulnerable to a cyber attack, right? And I'll even make a joke. I'm like, this is where you suck. And you know what? In 7 years, I've had a couple of hands raised. So how do you even address risk if you don't know where the risk is? And then it's a self-protectionism thing from the IT vendors. They don't want to tell the doctor that they're not doing their job. So this whole trust but verify, I think, is so important. And to answer your question directly, there are tremendous tools that are available right now that are also, you said it, CISSP, right? These are credentialed security engineers that use these tools, analyze the data, and they can go back to an individual practice, a small group, or a large DSO and say, here's where your cyber risk is. Here's how we recommend you address it. Now that you know the risk, you get to make a business decision. I feel like 99%, I keep going back to that number, they just don't do this, and that's the problem.
Let me ask you this, Gary. You've described the scenario where you come in because someone's already been hit. So you come in the back end, try to clean up the mess. So as far as BlackTalon's clients, how many come to you proactively before and, hey, help us prevent this? What's
that's
that?
The majority of our business. About 90% of our business every year is proactive cyber. So we represent a little over 1,400 dental practices across the U.S., along with lots of other types of companies, law firms, accountants, physician, medical groups. We do a power grid up in Alaska, things like that. But a majority of our business is, in fact, prevention. So we do a lot of the things that I've discussed, like the pen testing and the vulnerability scanning and the assessments and the virtual chief information security officer, where you get a fractional CISO that has a CISSP credential, right, working for that practice or that DSO, helping them with their security. And you get that true, like, who's watching the watcher, right, to make sure that the executive teams and the doctors really have a clear understanding of their risk versus what I like to say is kind of like this fake view, right, where they see a little icon blinking in the corner telling them they're secure. So yes, so we secure about 40,000 computers and devices in the dental space alone.
Wow, that's a lot.
Well, yeah, I think if you're listening to this show, it's eye-opening. You heard it. Gary called out 99% preventable. I love that you broke everything down into playing offense in addition to playing defense. And really thank you, Gary, for taking your time to share your expertise with us. Very insightful. And for those of you that are listening, if you joined us late, we've had Gary Salman on the show. He's CEO and co-founder of BlackTalon Security. Gary, we'll have information on how to find your company in the show notes. Is there anything that you want to share in parting words or comments?
I think the best advice I can give any doctor or executive of a DSO is you can't have head in sand syndrome, where you just kind of sit back and pretend everything's going to be fine. You can't be passive or submissive with this stuff, because as we just discussed, this is preventative. If you talk to any victim of a cyber event, they will tell you it's one of the most horrific things they've ever gone through, right? And I hate to see this. You hate to see victims, especially knowing that most of the stuff is preventable. So I say take a proactive approach, get aggressive, right? Turn the tables on the hackers and stand up for your practice, stand up for your business, because this is a winnable fight.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Gary.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right. Take care.